What if almost every fresh ingredient on a Mediterranean table could begin in one small garden just outside your kitchen? Not every ingredient, of course. The olive oil, the grains, the cheese, the lemons, and plenty of other staples may still come from somewhere else. But imagine walking outside before dinner and coming back with peppery arugula, tender spinach, a few broad leaves of Swiss chard, a head of radicchio, a handful of parsley, a bulb of fennel, carrots, beets, leeks, garlic, and sprigs of oregano and thyme. Suddenly the garden is not just producing vegetables, it is participating in dinner. That is the goal of this garden. We are not trying to squeeze the longest possible plant list into the smallest possible bed, and we are not pretending that every crop is equally productive in every climate. We are choosing 15 crops that can earn their space because they contribute something useful to a Mediterranean-style kitchen. Fresh leaves, cooking greens, roots for roasting, alliums for depth of flavor, and herbs you can reach for again and again. By the end, we will put all 15 into one simple garden framework, so you can adapt the idea to a raised bed, an in-ground plot, or several containers. Before we plant anything though, we need to fix one problem with the words plant right now. Right now is not the same gardening season everywhere in the United States. A gardener in Minnesota can be dealing with very different temperatures from a gardener in coastal California, South Florida, or Arizona. Many of the crops in this garden prefer cool or moderate conditions, while garlic follows a longer seasonal calendar of its own. So, use your local weather, frost pattern, and seed packet or local extension guidance as the final authority. When your conditions are entering the right window, this list tells you what deserves consideration and why. There is one more rule that will keep this plan honest. Do not confuse variety with productivity. 15 crops can sound impressive, but a garden becomes frustrating when every plant gets such a tiny token space that nothing produces enough to use. Think in terms of roles rather than equal shares. Some crops deserve a narrow strip because their flavor is intense. Some deserve a larger block because you eat them by the bowlful. Some deserve permanent edge space because they can stay useful for a long time. The garden should not look mathematically even. It should look like your cooking habits translated into soil. That also means you can scale the idea down without losing it. If you have one raised bed, you might grow only a few plants of each specialty crop and devote more room to the greens and roots you use most. If you garden in containers, you might keep thyme and oregano in individual pots, use a deep container for carrots or beets, and reserve a larger box for chard or salad greens. The point is not the exact geometry. The point is that every container or patch has a culinary job. I like to think of the garden in 4 layers. First come the leafy crops that can put fresh food on the table and, in several cases, keep producing as you harvest. Then come the roots and substantial vegetables that give a meal weight and sweetness. After that come the alliums, because a kitchen garden without the ingredients that build flavor can feel incomplete. And finally come the herbs. Those last plants may contribute very little weight to a harvest basket, yet they can influence an extraordinary number of meals. That distinction will matter later, because the heaviest crop is not always the crop with the highest kitchen value. Start with arugula. If the purpose of this garden is to make meals rather than simply fill space, arugula earns attention because a relatively small patch can have a very loud culinary voice. The leaves bring a peppery, slightly bitter edge that can turn a mild bowl of greens into something much more interesting. You can fold young leaves into salads, tuck them into sandwiches, scatter them over pizza after baking, or add them to pasta at the end so they soften without disappearing. You do not need a mountain of arugula for it to matter. That is also why I would resist the temptation to give arugula the biggest section of the bed. It is valuable because of intensity, not because every meal needs a giant bowl of it. In cool conditions, it can be a wonderfully useful crop, but warm weather can push leafy greens toward faster flowering and stronger flavors. If your weather is still hot, this may be a crop to delay until conditions moderate. If your weather is cooling, it can become one of the first patches that makes the garden feel immediately connected to the kitchen. With arugula, succession can be more useful than one oversized sowing. A household may enjoy a smaller amount at peak quality more than a huge flush that arrives all at once. If your season allows, a new short row or small patch started after the first can help spread the harvest. That same planning logic will appear again with several quick greens. Continuity often creates more kitchen value than sheer volume on one weekend. Spinach deserves the same kind of restraint. It is easy to imagine sowing a large area because the leaves cook down dramatically, but your planting decision should follow how often you actually use it and how long your local cool window lasts. If you have a short, cool period, concentrating on a manageable patch that you can harvest at good quality may make more sense than chasing a huge planting that runs into heat. If your climate gives you a longer cool season, you have more room to spread harvests over time. Next is spinach, and it fills a different role. Arugula is assertive. Spinach is adaptable. Tender leaves can go into salads, but they can also move into a hot pan, a soup, a pasta dish, or an egg dish without demanding that the whole meal revolve around them. That flexibility matters in a small garden. A crop becomes more valuable when you can use it on an ordinary Tuesday night without searching for a special recipe. Spinach is another crop where timing matters. It is a cool season vegetable, and heat can shorten the useful leafy stage by encouraging bolting and bitterness. That means plant now should really mean plant as your local conditions become suitable. In a northern garden, one window may come as summer fades. In a mild winter climate, the useful season can arrive much later. The exact date is less important than understanding the crop's preference. Now we need a green that changes the productivity equation, and that is Swiss chard. Chard earns its place because you do not have to remove the entire plant every time you want dinner. Once the plants are established and producing full leaves, you can take older outer leaves and leave the younger center growth to continue. That harvest pattern turns one plant into a recurring source of food instead of a single event. The culinary range is just as useful. The leaves can be sautéed, braised, added to soups, or folded into pasta dishes. The stems are edible too, and can be cooked until tender rather than automatically thrown away. In other words, chard gives you both volume and repeatability. It is not the same as spinach, and it should not be treated as a substitute in every dish, but in the garden, it solves an important problem: how to keep substantial greens available without constantly replanting the entire patch. Chard also gives you a useful visual and practical cue for harvest. You do not need to wait for a plant to become enormous. Once it is established and has enough mature foliage, taking a few outer leaves lets the center continue producing. That makes harvest feel less like a single finish line and more like a routine. Walk out, take what tonight's meal needs, and leave tomorrow's leaves growing. Radicchio introduces the opposite idea: anticipation. Part of its appeal is waiting for that tighter, more substantial form and then using it as a specialty ingredient. It can be a visual centerpiece in the bed, but the real payoff is culinary. Slice it thin with milder greens, char wedges so the edges soften and darken, or pair its bitterness with sweet, roasted roots. Suddenly, the garden has contrast not only in color, but in temperature, texture, and flavor. There is another reason chard works well in this story. It reminds us that high yield should not be reduced to one harvest day photograph. A plant that gives usable leaves repeatedly can be more valuable to a household than a crop that looks enormous once and then leaves an empty hole. We are designing for a stream of useful ingredients, not one dramatic basket. Then comes radicchio, and now the garden starts to look and taste very different. Radicchio brings deep red and purple color, crisp texture, and a distinctive bitterness that belongs in a very different culinary lane from mild spinach. It can be sliced into salads, paired with sweeter ingredients, or cooked by grilling or roasting to soften and transform some of that bitterness. If you enjoy that flavor, it can make a home garden feel far more interesting than a bed filled with only familiar green leaves. But radicchio is also a good crop for introducing honesty into the plan. Specialty crops earn their space only if you actually like eating them, and heading quality can depend on variety, timing, and growing conditions. I would rather give radicchio a thoughtful section than plant a large block simply because it looks beautiful in a seed catalogue. This entire garden works better when every crop is chosen for your kitchen, not for somebody else's idea of the perfect garden. At this point, we can already build a serious salad. Arugula for pepper, spinach for tenderness, chard leaves for substance, and radicchio for bitterness and color. But a Mediterranean kitchen cannot live on salad alone. Now we need greens that become especially useful when the pan, soup pot, or braising dish gets hot. Escarole is especially useful for cooks who like meals that begin with a pot rather than a salad bowl. Think about a cool evening when beans are simmering, garlic is softening in olive oil, and torn escarole goes in near the end. The crop is no longer just a leaf, it becomes part of the body of the meal. That is a different kind of usefulness from arugula, and it deserves to be recognized. Broccoli rabe brings another lesson. Preference matters more than trend. It is easy to plant a famous or fashionable crop because it sounds sophisticated, only to discover that the household does not enjoy its bitterness. Try a modest planting before giving it major space. A kitchen garden should become more personal every season. The first year teaches you what you actually finish. The next year should respond to that evidence. Escarole is the bridge. It belongs to the chicory family, and its leaves can move between raw and cooked uses. The tender inner leaves can work in salads, while the more substantial outer leaves can be cooked in soups, braises, or bean dishes. That makes one plant useful across more than one kind of meal. Instead of asking whether escarole is a salad green or a cooking green, it is more useful to ask which leaves you are harvesting and what you want them to do. Escarole also gives the garden another layer of flavor. A productive kitchen garden should not aim for everything to taste sweet and mild. Bitter greens are part of what makes this crop collection distinctive. They give you contrast, and contrast is one of the reasons a simple plate of vegetables can taste complete rather than repetitive. Broccoli rabe pushes that idea further. This is not simply a miniature version of standard broccoli. Broccoli rabe is grown for its tender shoots, leaves, and developing flower buds, and its flavor is more assertive and bitter. That bitterness is exactly why it works so well with strong partners such as garlic, olive oil, chile, beans, or pasta. If mild lettuce is the only kind of green you enjoy, broccoli rabe may not deserve much space. But if you like bold cooked greens, a modest patch can add a completely different category of meal to the garden. And that is an important decision point. We are not trying to declare one universal top 15 for every household in America. We are building a framework. If your family loves broccoli rabe, it earns more room. If nobody wants to eat it, replace that space with more of a crop you genuinely use. High yield has no practical value when the harvest sits untouched in the refrigerator. Now look at what the first part of the garden can do. We have leaves for salads, leaves for sautéing, leaves for soups, and several flavors ranging from mild to sharply bitter, but almost everything so far is still leafy. To turn this from a green garden into a dinner garden, we need vegetables that give the roasting pan, soup pot, and main plate more weight. That begins with fennel. Bulb fennel is one of the most distinctive plants in this whole plan because it gives both structure and aroma. The swollen base can be sliced thin and eaten raw for a crisp texture and an anise-like flavor, or cooked by roasting, braising, or sautéing until it becomes softer and sweeter. The feathery fronds can also be used in small amounts as an aromatic finishing ingredient. One plant, therefore, connects the vegetable side of the garden with the herb side. Fennel also teaches us something about space. Unlike arugula, which can contribute a lot of flavor from a small patch, bulb fennel needs enough room to form properly. It is not a crop I would squeeze thoughtlessly between larger plants and hope for the best. If you love fennel, plan for it deliberately. If you rarely cook with it, do not let the romance of a Mediterranean garden persuade you to sacrifice prime space for a vegetable you will not use. Fennel is also a good example of why one crop can deserve space for more than one reason. Its bulb contributes bulk, but its aroma changes the character of a dish. Raw slices can add crunch to a salad that already contains radicchio or arugula. Roasted wedges can sit beside carrots and beets. The fronds can finish a plate. One plant connects several sections of the final meal, and that crossover is valuable. Because root crops occupy that hidden space, Thinning and spacing are not trivial chores. Crowded seedlings compete for room, and the edible roots need enough space to size up. Follow the spacing guidance for the variety you are growing rather than guessing from a photograph. If you hate thinning, sow more deliberately. A few extra minutes at planting can save you from a dense mat of seedlings later. Beets add another
The user
planning
prompt
option
explicitly
because you can
states
decide what
NO
you value
human
more.
voice. No
If
speech,
roots are the
dialogue,
priority,
narration, or human
protect
vocal
enough
sound.
foliage to power root growth. If you enjoy tender beet greens, harvest selectively rather than stripping plants bare. The crop lets you choose, and choice is one of the reasons it fits a kitchen garden so well. Carrots are almost the opposite. They are familiar, widely useful, and easy to imagine disappearing into everyday meals. Raw carrots can go into salads or snacks. Cooked carrots can be roasted with thyme, simmered into soups, braised with other vegetables, or served as a simple side dish. They may not provide the dramatic flavor of arugula or fennel, but their usefulness is exactly what makes them valuable. The main garden lesson with carrots is below the surface. Root crops need soil that allows the root to develop without fighting severe compaction or large obstacles. That does not mean you need impossibly perfect soil, but it does mean that the root zone deserves attention before sowing. A beautiful canopy of carrot foliage is not the final goal. The edible root is. Give that part of the crop the conditions it needs. Beets bring another kind of efficiency because the root is not the only edible part. Young beet greens can be used as leafy greens, while the roots can be roasted, boiled, or incorporated into salads and side dishes. That does not mean stripping every leaf from a developing beet plant. The plant still needs foliage to grow. But selective use of suitable leaves reminds us that 1 square foot can sometimes contribute in more than one way. Beets also create a useful flavor contrast with the bitter greens. Roasting emphasizes their sweetness, which can balance radicchio, escarole, or broccoli rabe on the plate. This is where the garden begins to feel like a kitchen rather than a list. We are not choosing plants in isolation anymore. We are choosing ingredients that can balance one another. At roughly the midpoint of the garden, the big harvests may look like the obvious winners. A bunch of chard looks substantial. A cluster of carrots or beets feels satisfying. A fennel bulb has physical presence. But the next part changes how we measure productivity. Because dinner is not built from bulk alone. It is built from flavor. Leeks are a perfect example. A leek may spend a long time occupying its section of the bed, compared with a quick leafy crop, but its job in the kitchen is different. Sliced leeks can become the aromatic beginning of soups, braises, sautés, and vegetable dishes. You are not necessarily trying to pile a plate high with leeks. You are using them to make everything around them taste deeper and more complete. That means leeks require a deliberate trade-off. If your garden is extremely small and your priority is maximum rapid turnover, a long-season crop deserves careful thought. But if leeks appear regularly in the food you cook, then their slower pace can be justified. This is why the final plan will separate frequent harvest crops from crops that need a more committed block of time and space. Leeks and garlic also show why the garden should be mapped in time as well as space. A bed is not just a rectangle, it is a calendar. A fast green may occupy a patch for part of a season, while a leek or garlic planting can hold that patch much longer. When you plan only by square footage, long crops can surprise you. When you plan by square footage and time, they become much easier to fit. The same idea helps with containers. A pot devoted to a long-lived crop is unavailable for quick rotations until that crop is finished. So make that commitment consciously. If you have only a few containers, you might decide that buying leeks is more practical while growing parsley, chard, and thyme gives you more repeated harvests. There is no failure in that decision. A smart kitchen garden includes the crops you choose not to grow. Garlic also gives us a useful emotional contrast. It is an investment crop. You plant it knowing the payoff is later. That is different from cutting arugula or parsley soon after they become harvestable. And having both kinds of crops makes the garden more satisfying. Some plants reward impatience, others reward planning. The best garden has room for both. Garlic takes that lesson even further. Few ingredients can connect so many crops in this garden. Garlic can meet chard in a sauté pan, broccoli rabe with pasta, carrots and beets in a roasting dish, escarole in soup, or herbs in marinades and dressings. It does not have to dominate the plate to influence the entire meal. But garlic is also the clearest reminder that these 15 crops do not share one planting calendar. In many cold winter regions, garlic is commonly planted in fall, so cloves establish roots before winter and then resume growth in spring for a later harvest. Gardeners in warmer climates may use different timing and variety choices. So do not force garlic into the same schedule as a quick patch of arugula simply because both appear in the same video. The right question is not, can I plant every crop today? The right question is, which of these crops is entering the right window in my garden now? This is where I want to introduce the idea of kitchen yield. It is not a scientific unit, and it is not a replacement for measuring harvest weight. It is simply a useful planning question. How often does this patch meaningfully help you make a meal? A carrot might provide one substantial harvest. Chard may provide leaves repeatedly. Garlic may be used in small amounts, but influence many dishes. None of those patterns is automatically superior. The best one is the pattern that matches the way you cook. And if garlic proves that a small amount can transform dinner, the herbs take that idea even further. These plants may never produce the heaviest basket in the garden, yet they can be among the crops you miss most when they are not available. Start with parsley. If you think of parsley only as a decorative sprig placed on the edge of a plate, you are underestimating it. Parsley can function as an ingredient, chopped into salads, blended into sauces, stirred through grains or vegetables, added to soups, or scattered over a finished dish in a quantity large enough to bring freshness rather than merely color. A small patch near the kitchen can become incredibly convenient because you often need only a handful at a time. That harvesting pattern is exactly what we want from the herb section. Take what you need while keeping enough healthy growth on the plant to continue. The practical value comes from repeated access. Instead of buying a bunch, using a small portion, and forgetting the rest in the refrigerator, the garden lets you harvest closer to the amount you actually need. Parsley can also teach you to harvest with intention. Do not wait for the whole plant to look like a supermarket bunch before using it. Once it is established, regular selective harvest is exactly what turns it into a kitchen companion. The same is true of many herbs. Their value is not one ceremonial harvest. It is the habit of clipping a little, using it immediately, and coming back later. Dill asks for a slightly different rhythm because flowering is part of its natural annual life cycle. If leaves are your priority, repeated sowings can give you younger plants at different stages. If you also value flowers or seeds, then letting some plants mature gives the crop another culinary role. One plant can move through several uses over the season, but you should know which stage you are growing for. Oregano and thyme reward restraint in the kitchen and in the garden. More is not always better. Their concentrated flavors mean a small harvest can be enough, and their plants do not need to occupy the center of the vegetable bed to matter. In fact, putting them in an accessible edge or container can make them easier to manage and easier to remember. The most productive herb is often the one you can reach without stepping over 3 rows of vegetables. And consider how these herbs interact with the roots we planted earlier. Roast carrots with thyme one night and oregano another night, and the same vegetable moves in 2 different directions. Add parsley after roasting and the flavor becomes fresher. Add dill to a cooler preparation, and it changes again. The herb section is not 4 more items on a list. It is a multiplier for the rest of the garden. Dill has a different personality. Its soft, feathery foliage brings a fresh, distinctive flavor that works with vegetables, potatoes, sauces, salads, and many dishes influenced by the broader Mediterranean region. It is not interchangeable with parsley, and that is the point. The herb section should expand the flavor range of the same vegetables you are already growing. Dill also benefits from planning because it does not behave like thyme or oregano. It is generally grown as an annual, and it does not love root disturbance, so direct sowing is often the simplest approach. If you use dill regularly, successive sowings can help extend the period when tender foliage is available, rather than expecting one sowing to stay in perfect leafy condition indefinitely. Again, we are planning for continuity, not just the first harvest. Oregano is where the herb edge starts to feel more permanent. In suitable conditions, oregano can live beyond a single season and become a recurring source of strongly flavored leaves. A few sprigs can change roasted vegetables, beans, sauces, marinades, and dressings. This is exactly the kind of crop that makes kitchen yield such a useful idea. The harvest may be light in weight, but the plant can keep contributing flavor. Because oregano can persist, placement matters. If you are constantly rotating carrots, beets, and quick greens through the center of a bed, a longer-lived herb can get in the way. It often makes more sense to place oregano along an edge, in a dedicated herb strip, or in its own container where you can prune and harvest it without disrupting the annual vegetable rotation. Thyme belongs in the same conversation. Its leaves are small, but its culinary reach is wide. Thyme can move into roasted carrots, beets, soups, braises, beans, dressings, and vegetable dishes. You rarely need a massive harvest at once. You need reliable access to a few sprigs. That makes thyme a strong candidate for a permanent or semi-permanent edge where conditions suit it. And notice what just happened. The garden did not become more valuable because we added 4 giant crops. It became more valuable because we added 4 plants that can change the flavor of many other crops already growing there. Parsley can brighten roasted roots. Dill can create a completely different direction for potatoes or salads. Oregano can push roasted vegetables toward one flavor profile, while thyme can take the same vegetables somewhere else. A few square feet of herbs can multiply the number of meals you can create from the rest of the garden. Now we have all 15 crops, but planting them randomly would take us right back to the problem we started with. So instead of drawing one rigid bed with exact dimensions that may not fit your space, let us build a scalable plan from the kitchen backward. The first zone should be the area you can reach easily and harvest often. Put frequent use greens and herbs where picking them does not feel like a project. Arugula, spinach, Swiss chard, and parsley make sense near an accessible edge or path, because you may visit them repeatedly. If you grow in containers near a patio or back door, these are also excellent candidates for the pots you can reach most easily. Convenience matters more than gardeners sometimes admit. The easier an ingredient is to harvest, the more likely it is to become part of dinner. The second zone is your rotating seasonal section. This is where crops such as radicchio, escarole, broccoli rabe, carrots, and beets can move in and out as their preferred windows arrive. The exact sequence depends on your climate, but the principle stays the same. Do not reserve permanent real estate for a crop that is only there for one part of the season. Let that section change. The third zone is for crops that need deliberate room or a longer commitment. Fennel and leeks fit here. Give them the spacing and time they need, instead of treating them as filler between faster vegetables. If space is very limited, decide whether you love them enough to justify that commitment. A kitchen garden becomes more productive when you're willing to say no to crops you do not truly use. Garlic deserves its own seasonal block because its calendar can overlap the garden in a different way. In a cold winter system, that may mean a full planted area that remains committed into the following growing season. In a warmer system, your timing may be different. Either way, think of garlic as part of the long game rather than as a quick gap filler. Then create an herb edge or a separate herb container area. Oregano and thyme are especially useful here because where climate and conditions allow them to persist, they can remain while the annual vegetables around them change. Parsley and dill can be positioned more flexibly depending on how you grow and replant them. The important idea is to avoid putting a longer-lived herb in the exact spot you want to dig up every few weeks for succession crops. Now return to the table we imagined at the beginning. The salad can draw from arugula, spinach, radicchio, fennel, and parsley. The hot pan can receive chard, escarole, broccoli, rabe, leeks, and garlic. The roasting tray can combine carrots, beets, fennel, garlic, oregano, and thyme. Parsley or dill can change the finish. One garden does not have to provide every calorie or every ingredient to become meaningful. It only has to keep supplying the fresh components that make your cooking better. That is the real payoff. A productive kitchen garden is not the one with the longest plant list or the single heaviest harvest basket. It is the one that keeps showing up in your meals. If you love salads, give more space to arugula, spinach, radicchio, and parsley. If you cook greens constantly, expand chard, escarole, or broccoli rabe. If roasting vegetables is part of your weekly routine, carrots, beets, fennel, garlic, oregano, and thyme may deserve more room. The plan should bend toward your kitchen. And remember the climate rule that started this whole garden. Do not let a title on the internet overrule the conditions outside your door. Plant cool season crops when your local weather is moving into their useful range. Treat garlic according to the timing that works in your region. Pay attention to heat, frost, day length, and the behavior of the plants themselves. A Mediterranean-style kitchen garden in Maine will not run on the same calendar as one in Southern California, and it does not need to. The point was never to squeeze 15 plants into the smallest possible bed. The point was to make every part of the garden useful. Grow the greens you actually eat, the roots you actually roast, the alliums that start your cooking, and the herbs you reach for again and again. Give fast crops room to rotate. Give long crops the commitment they need. Put frequently harvested ingredients close enough that you will actually use them. Do that, and even a modest garden stops feeling like a collection of plants. It starts behaving like part of your kitchen. And once you begin planning the garden from the dinner table backward, choosing what to grow becomes much easier. You are no longer asking, what can I fit in this space? You are asking a much better question. What do I want this space to put on my table?